They called themselves patriots, defenders of American values. But under the black hoods and shadowy meetings, they were nothing more than ruthless terrorists. The Black Legion, an armed secret society that spreads fear and death across America, thrived in the darkness, targeting Black Americans, immigrants, union workers, and anyone who dared to challenge white supremacy. Unlike the Ku Klux Klan, the Black Legion didn't march in the streets or hold public rallies. They operated in the shadows, staying behind the scenes like ghosts of terror, striking silently and disappearing very quickly. Even before you wink, their members? They were not just rogue criminals, but police officers, judges, politicians, and high-profile businessmen. The very people who were supposed to uphold justice were the ones committing unimaginable crimes. One night in 1936, a man named Charles Poole was dragged from his home, beaten and executed by the Black Legion. What was his crime? He was suspected of opposing them. That murder, however, would be their downfall. What investigators uncovered shocked the nation. A secret army of thousands, plotting racial terror under the guise of patriotism. In this video, we will unveil the truth about the Black Legion, their rise, their crimes, and the dark legacy they left behind. This is the story they didn't want you to know. In the 1920s, America was a nation divided. The wounds of World War I were still fresh, and the country was struggling with economic instability, racial tensions, and fear of radicalism. The Ku Klux Klan had risen again, openly marching in cities and holding massive rallies. But in the background, something even more grievous was about to emanate. A secretive, militarized organization that didn't just preach white supremacy, they enforced it with violence. They called themselves the Black Legion. The Black Legion was founded in the early 1920s in Ohio before spreading rapidly to Michigan, Indiana, and other Midwestern states. Unlike the KKK, which relied on public intimidation and spectacle, the Black Legion preferred to keep their operation a secret. Members dressed in black robes instead of white, swearing an oath of absolute loyalty. Initially, the group presented itself as a paramilitary force that was dedicated to defending America against perceived threats like immigrants, Catholics, labor activists, and most of all, Black Americans seeking economic and political rights. Under the guise of patriotism, they declared war on those who were against them. They believed they were corrupting the country. One key figure that contributed to the rise of the Black Legion was William Shepard, an Ohio extremist who founded the group with the idea of creating an elite white supremacist militia. He envisioned a shadow government where the Legion would control politics, law enforcement, and industry. But the man who turned it into a true terrorist empire was Virgil Burt Effinger, a former salesman from Michigan who reorganized the Black Legion into a highly structured hierarchical force. Effinger adopted a military-style chain of command by dividing the organization into units that were called companies. And these companies were led by colonels and captains. Each company had a specific duty. Some focused on recruitment, while others specialized in intimidation, kidnapping, murder, and other special operations. Then there was Dayton Dean, one of the group's most notorious enforcers. He later confessed to multiple killings, exposing devastating details of how the Legion operated in the dead of night. To join the Black Legion, recruits underwent a terrifying initiation ritual. They swore an oath over a loaded gun, vowing to kill or be killed if they ever betrayed the group. The oath was sealed. Anyone who spoke out risked being executed by their brothers. Here's what the oath sounds like. If I betray the sacred trust of the Black Legion, may I be dismembered, my body scattered to the four winds, and my soul cast into eternal damnation. Once sworn in, new members were given black robes and a hood, which symbolized their complete devotion to the cause. The Black Legion was rapidly growing, from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. It was believed that 1 out of every 5 white men were involved in the Black Legion. Historian Dana Frank wrote about the incident in her book titled, "What Can We Learn from the Great Depression? Stories of Ordinary People and Collective Action in Hard Times." The chapter's introduction reads, typically a friend or relative, sometimes it was just a mere acquaintance, invited a potential recruit to a private meeting of an unnamed organization. Its purpose, the friend said, was protection. It could help with getting jobs too. At dusk on the appointed night, the friend picked him up at home in a car with maybe 3 or 4 other men already inside it, and they drove out to Henry Tapscott's farm 3 miles east of Lima, Ohio. Once there, the recruit was suddenly surrounded by 30, 40, 50, 200 armed men. It was hard to see in the pitch-black dark, but some had flashlights, dressed in long black hooded robes with eye slits, and on top, a black pirate hat with a white skull and crossbones. The robes had white trim, a cape with red satin lining, and another white skull and crossbones cut out of felt and safety pinned to the chest. The recruit was told to kneel. As a revolver was shoved into his back, two robed men stood on either side of him pointing guns. The captain of the guard spat out three questions. 1. Are you a native-born, white, Gentile, Protestant citizen? 2. Do you understand that this organization you are about to join is strictly secret and military in character? 3. This organization is classed by our enemies as an outlaw organization. Are you willing to join such an organization? Once the recruit replied yes, he was commanded to swear that he would never reveal anything about the organization or its activities, that he would accept an order and go to your death if necessary to carry it out, and that he would forget your party and vote for the best man if ordered to do so by your superior officer. We fight as guerrillas using any weapon that may come to our hand, preferably the ballot, and if necessary, by bearing arms. He made explicit the group's goals. Our purpose is to tear down, lay waste, destroy and kill our enemies without mercy, as long as one enemy remains alive or breath remains. After the recruit swore to the oaths, he was taught the password, elect only members to office, and handed a .38 caliber gun cartridge to keep as a reminder of both his oath and what would befall him should he betray it. Unlike the KKK, which operated through visible intimidation, the Black Legion's members carried out their mission in secret. They blended into societal positions like ordinary factory workers, police officers, and even judges by day. But by night, they became executioners. By the early 1930s, the Black Legion had expanded across the Midwest, with estimates of around 20,000 to 50,000 members, which skyrocketed as time passed. Their recruitment efforts were aggressive and strategic. Their target was white working-class men who were afraid of competition from black workers, police officers, and local politicians, ensuring protection from law enforcement. Factory supervisors and business owners who used the Legion to suppress labor unions and protests were also included. One of their major approaches was fear. Many recruits didn't join willingly. They were pressured or threatened into swearing allegiance to the cause. If someone refuses, they were often beaten, or worse, unlived. "You're either with us or you're against us," was a common phrase among Legion recruiters. This strategy allowed the Black Legion to infiltrate every level of society. This made it nearly impossible to fight back. As the Great Depression destroyed America, racial and economic tensions reached an extreme point. Unemployment increased, and resentment grew among poor white workers who saw black laborers as competition. The Black Legion thrived in this chaos. They spread propaganda, blaming black Americans, Jews, Catholics, and immigrants for the country's struggles. They labeled civil rights activists as communists and justified their brutal attacks as protecting America. With their growing influence, the Black Legion became more than just a hate group. They were a shadow army that shaped politics and law enforcement in the Midwest. They infiltrated local governments, influencing policies that disenfranchised black voters. In some cities, they controlled police departments, ensuring that crimes against black citizens went unpunished. Their ultimate goal was to create a white supremacist dictatorship that was enforced by violence. Though the Black Legion is an offshoot of the KKK, they were far more militant and organized. The KKK observed public rallies and relied on spectacles, while the Black Legion operated in secrecy, where they carried out silent assassinations. However, while the KKK's influence was strongest in the South, the Black Legion controlled parts of the North and Midwest. Unlike the KKK, who used public lynchings as intimidation, the Black Legion preferred to kidnap, torture, and execute victims in secret, ensuring that fear was deeply ingrained in communities. By the early 1930s, the Black Legion had become an invisible force of terror. They murdered, burned homes, and enforced racial segregation with brute force, all while hiding behind the facade of patriotism. As their power grew, their boldness and brutality also grew. Soon they made a fatal mistake that exposed their crimes to the world. They didn't come with warnings. No burning crosses, no public displays. The Black Legion struck like assassins, silent, methodical, and ruthless. While the Ku Klux Klan was busy holding public rallies, the Black Legion was executing their victims in the dead of night. These were not random attacks. They were designed to spread terror, keep black people in their place, and erase any challenge to white dominance in America. As the Great Depression got worse, black workers in northern cities found jobs in factories, steel mills, and auto plants. They often worked under brutal conditions for lower wages than their white counterparts. Many white workers saw them as economic threats. The Black Legion fed off this resentment, using it as a reason to terrorize black laborers. They believed black workers were taking jobs from white men, and that any efforts to unionize were part of a communist plot. One of the well-known tactics was kidnapping and lynching black workers suspected of labor activism. They stormed homes in the middle of the night, dragged their victims to isolated areas, and beat them, sometimes to death. One of their victims was George March, a black auto worker in Detroit who tried to organize black and white workers under one union. In 1935, George was dragged from his home by 6 Black Legion members. His wife and children watched in horror as he was thrown into a black sedan and driven off into the night. His body was later found in a shallow grave outside the city. His skull had been fractured, hands bound with barbed wire, and a bullet resting in his chest. No arrests were made. The police, infiltrated by Black Legion, closed the case before an investigation even began. The Black Legion wasn't just against black workers. They also targeted black political leaders, preachers, and activists who spoke against racial injustice. Many of their victims were local organizers fighting for black voting rights and equal pay. The Legion saw these activists as a direct threat to white control and vowed to silence them permanently. In 1934, Reverend A.L. Turner, a respected black pastor in Indiana, began organizing black residents to register to vote in upcoming local elections. He believed political power was the only way to fight the growing racial violence in his city. But the Black Legion had other plans. One evening, as Turner was leaving his church, he was ambushed by hooded figures. Witnesses reported hearing 2 gunshots, followed by the sound of a car speeding away. His body was found after several hours, slumped over in a ditch, his Bible still clutched in his hands. The police labeled it a robbery gone wrong, but the black community knew the truth. This was an execution that was used to send a message that any black man or woman who dared to rise would be put down. Unlike the Klan, who often staged large public lynchings, the Black Legion's terror was more personal and unpredictable. They carried out their operations, burning homes and families, assassination, and terrorizing the neighborhood without warning. The goal wasn't just to kill, it was to psychologically destroy black communities so that no one would feel safe. Henry Davis was a black shop owner in Ohio who had built a thriving business in his community. His store was one of the few places where black residents could shop without being harassed. The Black Legion perceived this as a challenge to white economic power. One night, Henry woke up to the smell of gasoline. Before he could react, his store was already on fire with his family still inside their home on the 2nd floor. He managed to rescue his wife and children, but his business, being the source of his family's livelihood, was destroyed. No insurance company would cover him, and no white-owned banks lent him money to rebuild. The Black Legion had a message: black success would not be tolerated. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Black Legion's terror was how deeply they had infiltrated the police force and local government. In many towns, the men wearing Black Legion hoods at night were the same men wearing police badges during the day. When black families reported attacks, the police refused to investigate. When black leaders were assassinated, officials called it random violence. When black homes and businesses were burned, the fire department would arrive too late or not at all. In Detroit, 1/3 of the police force was believed to be connected to the Black Legion. This meant that black communities were completely vulnerable, left to fend for themselves against a system that actively worked against them. Despite the overwhelming violence, black communities were not helpless. Many black men, inspired by Marcus Garvey and the ideas of self-defense, began to arm themselves. In some cities, black neighborhood patrols formed, watching for Black Legion attacks and fighting back when necessary. Some churches and businesses hired armed guards to protect their buildings from arson. Some black newspapers began publishing names of suspected Black Legion members, exposing them to public scrutiny. While these efforts helped some communities, the systemic power of the Black Legion made it nearly impossible to fight back on a large scale. However, everything changed in 1936 when the Black Legion made one fatal mistake: the murder of Charles Poole. This brutal killing brought the Black Legion out of the shadows to face justice. For years, the Black Legion operated in silence, slaughtering Black Americans with impunity. But in 1936, their arrogance became their downfall. A single murder exposed everything, which led to a trial that exposed their secrets to the world. Unlike the Ku Klux Klan, the Black Legion didn't function as a loose collection of racist mobs. They operated like a military organization, with strict ranks, training, and a chain of command. At the top of this system was the commander who oversaw all Legion activities in a given region. Just after this position were lieutenants who managed local chapters and organized attacks. The lower ranks included sergeants and foot soldiers, the ones who carried out assassinations, beatings, and lynchings. This structure allowed the Black Legion to be more disciplined and harder to infiltrate. Unlike other hate groups, they didn't just rely on mob violence, they had plans, intelligence, and an internal network that stretched across multiple states. New members weren't just invited to join, they had to prove their loyalty through brutal initiation rituals. Before joining, a recruit had to swear an oath. "I pledge my life to the Black Legion. I will obey without question. I will execute orders without hesitation. And if I betray the Legion, I accept the punishment of death." After taking the oath, the recruit would be forced to participate in a violent act, beating a black man, burning down a house, or even committing murder. This blood initiation ensured that every member had blood on their hands that binds them to the organization, through fear and complicity. Unlike the Klan, which recruited openly, the Black Legion expanded its ranks quietly and strategically. They focused on three key groups: the law enforcement and government officials, working-class white men, and military veterans. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Black Legion was its infiltration into police forces, courts, and local governments. Many of their members were sheriffs, judges, politicians, and men of exalted offices, ensuring that their crimes went unpunished. If a black family reported an attack, the police, many of whom were Legion members, would destroy the evidence or blame the victim. Prosecutors refused to press charges, and juries acquitted Legion members, even in the face of clear evidence. This made the Black Legion even more dangerous than the Klan. They weren't just terrorizing black communities, they controlled the very system meant to protect them. The Black Legion primarily targeted frustrated, unemployed white men who felt powerless during the Great Depression. They told recruits that black workers were the reason they couldn't find jobs. They spread propaganda about a communist plot to replace white Americans with black workers. They offered a sense of purpose and brotherhood to those who felt abandoned by society. With their ability to tap into economic anxiety and racial hatred, the Black Legion was able to convert thousands of men into cold-blooded life-takers. Many Black Legion members were ex-military who had served in World War I. They were recruited because of their combat experience, making them highly skilled in weapons, strategy, and guerrilla warfare. These men didn't just march in robes, they were trained assassins who were capable of executing military-style raids on black homes and businesses. Unlike the Ku Klux Klan, the Black Legion followed three main rules to remain secret: no public demonstrations, no paper trails, and no mercy for betrayal. The Legion never held parades, rallies, or public gatherings. They moved like a ghost army, leaving behind only dead bodies and burned buildings. Orders were given verbally and were never written down to prevent traces. Membership rosters were destroyed regularly to erase any proof of their existence. Anyone who tried to document their activities was killed. Any member suspected of talking to outsiders or betraying the Legion was executed immediately. Some were shot in the back of the head. Others were drowned in rivers, and their bodies were buried in the woods, never to be found. Fear kept members silent. Even if they wanted to leave, they knew it meant signing their death warrant. Unlike the Klan, the Black Legion preferred drive-by assassinations and ambushes. Black activists were gunned down in their cars, in front of their homes, and on their way to work. Black businesses were sprayed with bullets, warning others not to step out of line. These attacks left no witnesses, no suspects, and no survivors. Burning homes and churches became a signature of the Black Legion tactic. They would douse buildings in gasoline, set them on fire, then vanish into the night. Black schools, churches, and meeting halls were bombed, leaving communities in fear. If a black family moved into a white neighborhood, their house would be burned to the ground within days. Some victims weren't killed immediately. The Legion would abduct them, torture them for hours, and then dump their bodies as a warning. Black workers who tried to unionize were whipped, beaten, or had their fingers chopped off. Black men accused of disrespecting white women were castrated and left to bleed out. The brutality was meant to send a message: step out of line, and you die. For years, the mainstream press ignored or downplayed the Black Legion's crimes. Many newspapers were run by white editors who didn't want to expose a group that included local politicians and police chiefs. Reports of missing black activists were dismissed as personal disputes or unexplained disappearances. When black newspapers tried to expose the truth, their offices were burned down or bombed. It wasn't until the 1936 trial of Charles Poole's killers that the Black Legion was finally dragged into the spotlight. On May 12, 1936, the Black Legion made one of their most reckless executions. Their victim was Charles Poole, a 32-year-old white man and an innocent factory worker in Detroit. Unlike their usual victims, black workers, activists, and immigrants, Poole was white. His only crime was that he was accused of being soft on communists and immigrants. That night, a group of Black Legion members kidnapped Poole, drove him to a secluded area, and shot him to death. This murder was different. Unlike their previous operations, the police couldn't sweep this one under the rug. Poole's wife reported him missing immediately. Witnesses saw him being dragged into a car by armed men. A concerned citizen reported a suspicious car at the crime scene. Unlike past victims who were often black, poor, or powerless, Poole was a working-class white man with connections. His murder forced the police to intervene. For the first time, law enforcement officials couldn't turn a blind eye. Police interrogated Dayton Dean, who was one of the Black Legion members involved in the killing. At first, Dean refused to talk, but as pressure became more intense, he cracked under interrogation and confessed everything. Dean's revelation shocked the entire nation. Dayton Dean whispered, "You don't understand. There are hundreds of us. We run the city. The police, the judges, the politicians. Half of them are in on it." His confession blew the case wide open. He mentioned names from local businessmen to police officers. He described secret meetings, weapons stockpiles, and assassination plans. He exposed the Legion's chain of command and its influence all across the nation. What started as an investigation into one murder suddenly turned into a full-scale takedown of the Black Legion. With Dean's confession in hand, law enforcement swung quickly into action. Raids were conducted across Michigan and Ohio, exposing secret bunkers, weapons caches, and membership lists. Over 50 members were arrested in a matter of weeks. Police officers, government officials, and high-profile businessmen were among those taken into custody. The public was stunned. For years, people had heard whispers about a mysterious, violent organization, but the magnanimity of their power was beyond their imagination. The courtroom showdown. The trial of the Black Legion members became one of the biggest news stories of the decade. Witnesses described horrific beatings, lynchings, and burnings that were done by the Legion. The defendants once feared men in the shadows, now sat powerless, exposed to the world. Dayton Dean's testimony revealed how the Legion carried out their killings. Former members turned informants gave deep details about secret rituals and assassinations. Surviving victims and their families came forward, telling their stories in front of the entire nation. The evidence was overwhelming. The once untouchable Black Legion was finally facing justice. They became one of the most hated organizations in America. When the verdict came down, it was a decisive blow. Dayton Dean and several others were sentenced to life in prison. Some members were executed for their crimes, while others received long sentences that ensured they never walked free again. The convictions destroyed the Black Legion's leadership and caused the organization to crumble. Law enforcement used the trials as a stepping stone to dismantle the entire network. Secret membership lists were seized, which led to more arrests across the country. The FBI launched investigations into government officials who were suspected of being members. Newspapers also began to expose the Legion's influence in politics, law enforcement, and business. The public backlash was immediate and consequential. The Black Legion's reign of terror was so shocking that even Hollywood couldn't ignore it. Just 1 year after the group's exposure, a major film shook the feathers by bringing their crimes to the big screen. The 1937 film Black Legion, starring Humphrey Bogart, was directly inspired by the real-life organization. Bogart played a factory worker who is lured into a secret white supremacist group similar to the real Black Legion. The film exposes the group's violence, its manipulation of working-class men, and its brutal tactics. The movie was one of the first Hollywood films to confront white supremacy head-on. It showed how ordinary people could be seduced by hate and how that hate could destroy them. Years later, the 1951 film Storm Warning carried a similar message, depicting Klan-like violence in the South. Though it didn't name the Black Legion, its themes reflected the same terror these groups inflicted on black communities. These films serve as historical records, reminding of a time when hate ran unchecked. But they also serve as warnings, because while the Black Legion is gone, the forces that created it are still here. White Americans, who had ignored the Legion's crimes against black communities, became horrified when they learned how far the organization had spread. The Black Legion, which was once powerful and feared, collapsed overnight. Even though the official organization was dismantled, its racist ideology didn't die. Many former members simply melted back into society, never facing justice. Others joined different white supremacist groups to continue their terror under new names. Some members found their way into law enforcement and politics, just to ensure that racism remained deeply embedded in American institutions. It may look as though the Black Legion may have been dismantled, but when you look closely, you observe its influence never truly disappeared. Its members didn't vanish, they simply adapted. And the fight against racial terror continues to this day. The fall of the Black Legion was a victory, but it was also a reminder of how deeply white supremacist organizations can infiltrate society. The Black Legion was more than just a hate group. It was a hidden empire of terror that was protected by those in power. Their downfall wasn't inevitable. It only happened because one murder forced the system to act. But their legacy still lives on in the form of modern hate groups, police brutality, and systemic racism. The Black Legion wasn't just a random story from history, it was a warning. And that warning remains as urgent as ever. The Black Legion may have disappeared from headlines, but its spirit never truly died. The racism, violence, and hatred it embodied still hovers around America today. Sometimes in plain sight, sometimes lurking in the shadows. The Black Legion was a white supremacist militia that thrived in an era when terror against black communities was ignored or even encouraged by those in power. While law enforcement dismantled the group, its ideology simply metamorphosed into new forms. Many of the Legion's tactics, lynchings, threats, and intimidation resurfaced in other hate groups that came after it, and even modern extremist groups. Today we still see echoes of the Legion in racially motivated killings, police brutality, and the rise of organized hate groups. The systemic racism the Black Legion championed did not end with their downfall. Redlining, mass incarceration, voter suppression, and racial violence all stem from the same forces of white supremacy that fueled the Legion. The legacy of terror of the Black Legion still lingers. History teaches us one thing. If we ignore the past, we risk repeating it. This story is not just history. It's a lesson. The Black Legion was one of the deadliest white supremacist organizations in American history, yet it remains largely forgotten. Its rise and fall expose a chilling truth. Racism doesn't disappear. It evolves. Though the Black Legion itself was brought down, its core beliefs persist in systemic racism, hate crimes, and political extremism today. The group's history shows how white supremacist organizations can infiltrate every aspect of society, from law enforcement to government, from business to everyday life. Understanding this history is important. It reminds us that the fight for justice isn't over. The same structures that protected the Black Legion still protect racist violence today. So what can we do? We must demand justice and never turn a blind eye to racial hate.